Welcome to the Single Father Podcast. I am your host, Kendall Donaker. This podcast is dedicated for anyone out there who's dealing with mental health and fatherhood. You'll hear about my struggles, my defeats, my victories, my highs, my lows, my triumphs, my tribulations, and everything in between. I like to call this a collection of journal entries into my struggle and adapting to single fatherhood. Without further ado, let's take a look inside my journal, the Single Father Podcast. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and otherwise. It's the Single Father here, Father DZ. Just wanted to thank you so much for tuning in. It's the first episode of the podcast. Bear with me as the first couple episodes, just is a work to get the sound and the studio and everything on how I want the podcast to come across is a work in progress. So after the first couple of episodes, it gets muy better. So just stick with me and thank you so much for tuning in. You're listening to The Single Father with Kendall Donaker. Guys, this show is something that I created that was originally for an app, and, the app is still in development. But as a little bonus, I wanted to do a podcast to discuss, mental health, anxiety, depression, and really have more so of a cathartic experience for myself and other people, and, talk to some friends of mine, some psychologists, psychiatrists, and really get an insight into what mental health means and, just kind of, I guess, break the stigma that a lot of us kind of feel towards mental health and, get another resource that we can have, maybe that can help us through some tough times. I really think podcasts like this and other ones as well, there's a great one that I listen to called Inside of You with Michael Rosenbaum. But, things like this can really, I think, help when you're going through a tough time. I was listening to someone mention a show called Bojack Horseman. And I mentioned it in the podcast too, but that show is a cartoon, but it's something that really speaks to me and, makes me emotional because I think it really pulls on my heartstrings and just how relatable it is. And I think that's why I wanted to start this podcast, is to kind of be relatable to people. And, anyone who's going through something right now, it's okay. We're all going through something of our own nature, and you're not alone. And, I wish someone told me that when I was younger, but if you're listening, you're being told right now. And I hope it means something to you. Throughout this podcast, again, I'll be talking to a lot of different people. And in today's podcast, I talked to one of my good friends, Vee. Vee is someone that I worked with in the past, and we've been really good friends, and we spoke about a lot. And, she's gone through a lot too. She's a really strong, beautiful woman. And, we get to, learn more about her. She's someone that I really, I thought I knew well, but, within speaking to her, I think I really got to know her on a deeper level. And it was really nice to, kind of amplify our friendship in that way. So again, I'm really excited for this. What this show means, basically venting to a pack of people who have your back. We're all a pack of people who just want to vent, and we're a community, and we're supportive, and, and that's kind of the nature of what the show means. So I hope you can take it with you. I hope it means something. We stand together, we vent together, VentPack. And for better or for worse, here we go. You are the nicest person in history. Just so this podcast works, we recently just wrapped up doing another one, and it just did not save. I don't know what happened. And you know what? There is a paid sponsorship that I have to do for Anchor, and all I can say is gotta love Anchor. So, the theme of the podcast is mental health, and we spoke about it a lot, but we'll kind of just reiterate a lot of the things that we said and, go through it again. And, you ended in a really great note on mental health, and I think we should begin with that on this one. Can you repeat what you said?
If I'm pretty sure we're talking about the same thing. I said that, people will often not see mental health as really a physical thing. So imagine if you got, shot in the arm, the moment that you experienced it and the recovery from that are all, painful periods of time. Well, it's the same thing with mental illness. If your mental illness is triggered by certain actions or certain events, it hurts just as much in that moment and the healing process from then on as it would if you had a physical injury, or if you were born with a mental illness that you struggle with every day, that's still pain.
Right, right. And then I was kind of mentioning that, you know, it's said a lot that, people in Africa have it worse, right? But when you say that, you're kind of deflating or negating a lot of the feelings that that person has felt. You're basically saying that their feelings are not valid because someone else has it worse. But it doesn't necessarily take away from the fact that they're still feeling it anyway.
Exactly. It's just such a hard saying to hear when you're going through something. And it's like, and it teaches you, well, people suffer worse than me. What right do I have to be sad? And that's not true at all. Everyone has a right to experience what emotions they're feeling because, your emotions aren't going to ask when it's convenient to be had or if they're convenient at all. You're just going to feel them immediately.
Exactly. And I think one of the reasons why I wanted to bring it up is because, there is kind of an expanding topic in today's world about mental health. You mentioned TV shows like 13 Reasons Why
Mhm.
are a good representation of mental health, but you also said it can be kind of controversial. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. I think the two main arguments when it comes to the controversy around, 13 Reasons Why is just the fact that it could be romanticizing, suicide and saying to individuals, you will live on after you're gone, and the people who hurt you will feel bad and they'll get their justice. And, the counter argument to that is like, well, they're dead. How will they know? Death is incredibly final. And then the other side of the argument is saying, well, this is one of the few shows and few opportunities that really just start a conversation about mental health and how, things shouldn't affect or, how you shouldn't push things aside and what happens when too many, too much bullying or too many life stresses or too many incidents build up until someone, ends up taking their own life.
Right. And, I think everyone's had a little conversation with themselves about, am I still meant to be around? But, you have to find different coping methods for that and, different doors out of that situation. Are there any avenues that you've went through in your life that helped you kind of get through some of those dark thoughts or any experiences that you would like to share?
I had many coping mechanisms. A lot of them were unhealthy, you know. I personally suffer a lot from, anxiety, and I had a lot of expectation placed on me from a young age to always be perfect and to take care of my family and to be this, this, and that. And it left an incredibly small margin of error. And so I had coping mechanisms for that. Sometimes it was easier to just, to act out instead of keeping it all inside, even though it hurt myself, other people, people that I cared about, my family, things of that nature. And then as I grew up and I realized, that I had to kind of talk about something or else I wasn't going to make it to an old age, I started implementing healthier coping mechanisms. Kind of mindfulness and deep breathing has really helped me. I can't talk about it enough. There's a great episode on the Netflix show Explained that talks about meditation, and it's so helpful and it really put it all into perspective for me. And then other things like journaling or writing down my feelings and a bunch of other little techniques that my therapist has showed me.
Nice. And those are amazing ways to, get some better help out there. For me, I like to do a lot of meditation as well. And what I also found is exercise is amazing too.
Mm.
So I'll exercise a lot or I'll stretch. Sometimes I don't know why, but stretching makes me feel good.
Yeah.
things of that sort. But we talked about a lot of good stuff. What are some of the bad ways to cope? I mean, when we previously spoke, you said, some people in your family, and specifically your mother, has dealt with a lot of negative coping mechanisms. What are some of those?
You, my biological mother and my older sister, and a bunch of other people on that side of the family, they cope with alcohol and drug use and whatnot. And even just taking their anger out on other people or projecting their pain is their type of coping mechanism too, you know.
Yeah. And by the way, it's so nice to hear clear, but but previously our past podcast, you were cooking,
And now
which ultimately made me hungry. I'll tell you a bad coping mechanism is I've been eating a lot of pizza lately. And
Mhm.
that's not so much as coping as in I just ate one piece of pizza and I just fell into this hole of no, I just love pizza.
I
But
have to like tell myself, no, you can't eat that pizza to make yourself feel better. You can eat it after you feel better though.
exactly. Real quick, I have this philosophy where I don't drink soda. I only drink it with alcohol. And that has been my philosophy for the last couple of years. The other day, I'll just say it. I got really, really high, and I will say that I don't smoke to feel. I don't smoke as like I'm depressed and I need to smoke. I smoke sometimes like before bed, and I don't do it as often. Just sometimes maybe if I get a little too anxious, I'll just like to relax. I'm hugely big on like an indica. Exactly. So, anyways, I smoked a little too much. Got really high, went into my fridge, could
No.
not find a single thing to drink. And you ever get so like dry mouth to the point where like you're talking like
Yeah.
that the entire time? Yeah. So that's what it was like. And in fact, I had my dad come down. He's like, "Hey, you good on?" I'm great. So went into my fridge. Only thing I could find was a root beer, and I don't drink soda without alcohol. So, but I had a root beer, and that was almost like a gateway drug because the next morning I had another root beer and then another one, and then finally I told my family to hide them from me.
It was the same way.
Yes, and now
The mun the munchies usually hit me super hard.
yeah,
So I only surround myself and stock my fridge with like healthy foods.
which is
So if
smart.
like, oh, I know. So if I like end up eating like everything in my fridge, I've only consumed like 100 calories.
Yeah, exactly. But sometimes it's really hard. Just I'm a big so I'm a huge advocate on health. I love like supporting my body and feeling good about myself. And because there's a lot of times where you don't feel good about yourself and you have to really wonder what's the reasoning behind that. And, I saw this tweet from Big Sean not too long ago. And that's obviously Big Sean, the singer. Not just a friend I have. I don't call him Big Sean. But, I saw a tweet from him where he's like, "Hey, I've been feeling kind of bad lately. I went to the doctor and I realized a lot of the things I've been eating I'm allergic to." And he's like, "Really, take care of your body, right?" Which is interesting because a few weeks ago, I get like really, really sick out of nowhere and I went to urgent care. And when I went there, they're like, "Oh, here's some antibiotics, but hey, your heart rate is just racing like uncontrollably out of your body. Did you, she's like, did you have caffeine today?" I'm like, "No, I just woke up." And I said, "My heart's just been like that." And it has. I've always had an abnormally fast heart rate.
Oh, so you're
Um,
tachycardic.
I is that Yiddish? What do you think? Explain that to me.
It's just what you said. It just means that you have a really high, like fast heart rate. But I assumed that it was because you had always had it and it wasn't because of something you ate. Was it because you had an allergy?
No, actually, so she said, well, so we did some tests because she's like, "Hey, that's really abnormal. I'm gonna do some tests on you." So we did an EKG and whatever other thing you call it, just to monitor your heart. And she said, "Hey, it's really strange. There's nothing wrong with your heart. I see no history of heart disease in your family or anything like that. I think you might have thyroid disease." And
Oh.
I'm like, "What the fuck is that?" And she's like, "It's a really common, you know, undiagnosed disease that a lot of people have. It affects your mood, your heart rate, your emotions, how you feel. It's really important to get that checked out." And so I got it checked out, and sure enough, I had thyroid disease. The crazy thing about that is in my entire life, I've had an abnormally fast heart rate, and then ultimately can include with anxiety and depression and things like that. So as I developed anxiety in high school, I would always go to my parents and tell them something is wrong with my heart. As you know, just describe a panic. You've had a panic attack before, right?
Yeah.
Can you describe what that's like?
I have so many anxiety attacks, but the one panic attack I had was probably the most terrified I've ever been in my whole entire life.
Hmm.
It felt that like the world, like it's weird because it's almost hallucinogenic in the way that like your vision gets so, like tunneled. And it's like everything is so loud and everything just seems like it's like crashing and your heart is beating fast. And you think to yourself, you're like, oh, I'm dying. Like that's the only explanation for this is I feel like I'm dying.
Exactly.
And that was horrible. And my panic attack, took like 6 hours to actually recover from because after my panic attack, I had you know, like anxiety attacks leading onto that. And that was because work tried to call me in. Like it can happen at any time in like such random times. And it was just horrible.
Exactly. I mean, that's spot on. So a panic attack is super scary because it fucks with your mind. It can trick your mind into believing that you're dying. So you get shortness of breath, your chest tightens, you feel weak, and you feel really scared. And it amplifies because you almost can panic even more because you're panicking.
Mhm.
So something's wrong with your body, and your body responds to that by panicking, and you're panicking because it's a weird process, but ultimately you just feel like I'm going to die. Like you're 100% certain. And I would always go to my parents when I was younger because my heart would race and I get panic attack. I'm like, guys, I'm dying. Something wrong with my heart. So I went to so many doctors.
Wow.
I went to a cardiologist and things like that, and everyone would tell me there's nothing wrong with your heart. You just have anxiety. And I'm like, how the fuck can it be anxiety? I know for 100% certain there's something wrong with my heart, to the point where my parents started to look at me like I was crazy. And not that, but they're just like, hey, nothing's wrong with your heart. And I would look at them like they're crazy. Like I would almost want to cry. I'm like, guys, I know my body. I'm so confident that something is wrong.
Mm.
And ultimately, I had to come to accept that it was this anxiety. But it took a long, long time to realize that. And after realizing that, it took even longer time to cope with it.
Mm.
But then, so when she told me that I ultimately had thyroid disease, I broke down and cried. And I did that because it was like finally someone told me, I know that you're hurting, and here's how you fix it.
Mm.
And I've never had someone tell me that before because everyone just assumed, hey, you're crazy. Like there's nothing wrong with you.
Yeah.
And then finally someone told me, this is what's wrong, and here's how you fix it. And so I got on medication, and my mood started becoming better. I feel better. My heart feels like at a normal pace.
Right.
And it's kind of strange because when you go through something like this your entire life where your heart's just abnormally high all the time,
Mm.
it's almost a surreal feeling to just feel completely calm. Like
That's
my heart,
crazy.
it's I couldn't even describe it. It's the most surreal feeling. Like for the first time in years, I feel so calm, and it's a great feeling because I feel happier and better or anything. So it's a crazy, and a lot of people are undiagnosed with that. So it's crazy. I didn't even know.
I had
Uh,
no clue. I had a friend in high school who kind of figured out during our friendship that that she had something wrong with her thyroid. And I think I'm not saying that that's what caused our friendship to end, but she had gone through a period of time where she was all over the place, and then it caused a few fights, and then we ended up just having a falling out, you know.
exactly. Yeah. And it's sad too because I started analyzing a lot of situations in my life and realizing maybe this happened because I wasn't, I guess you could say, emotionally stable for many, many years. Because something's wrong with your thyroid. it's unfortunate that you and your friend had to go through that, but in reality, you can have mood swings. You can have, and it really fucks with you. So,
Yeah, totally.
and you don't even know. You can say, "Man, this person's fucking crazy," but really, maybe something's wrong.
Right. It did kind of put an answer to it, like,
Yeah.
and I really felt for her because she had to do like heart surgery and all of that. And I don't
Mm,
know why. I never looked up like the reasons or anything, but she went through a lot. And I could tell how much like she was suffering because she would be at like such high, like almost manic levels of how like excited and energetic she was. And then she would
yeah.
have like immediately she'd shoot down into like insecurity almost.
Yes. Unfortunately, a huge side effect to thyroid disease is you can feel really insecure about yourself.
Mm.
And it's one thing to, call it that, but there's another thing as well is, I've also had a hard childhood myself, and, when you're talking about different coping methods on how to deal with certain things, I think that one of the things that I was scared of that we touched upon previously is that I was scared that I wouldn't be able to cope in the way that I wanted to, and I would end up in the same situation as my parents did. Because as I said, my parents got in a really really rough divorce. They didn't. I'm just I love both my parents, and I talk and see my dad every day, and I'm not knocking anyone because I know how it is, but they really didn't make it so great and understanding in the household. It was one of those divorces that we're both angry and we're taking it out on each other, and it will affect you guys. But at the moment, they didn't care.
Right.
There's so many situations that I remember. I mean, I remember one time I'm at my friend's house and both of my parents are outside, and I forget what they were there for, but my dad literally got on one knee and begged my mom to come back to him in front of my friend's house, in front of all my friends. I'm watching this and just mortified, and I was confused and I didn't understand what was going on, and no one really explained that to me, and it was really rough. And one of the things that I was so scared of when I had my daughter was I was scared of going through the same thing because I felt like I was truly traumatized. And I felt like within that fear, there's, as I said, I have my own thoughts of what happened between my child's mother and me. But within that fear, I feel like sometimes you can form your fears into reality.
Definitely. Yeah.
And so, and ultimately, me and my child's mother, we ended up splitting up. I told you a really eerie thing that happened is I ended up picking the same lawyer that my mom did when she was going through court battles with my dad back in the day, which was strange. And, it just didn't end up being a good situation, and still is pretty rough. And you can kind of pick up certain things from your parents. And I think one of the things that we talk about that's really important to me in my growth is, hey, I want you to understand me because I had a rough childhood, but you also don't want to blame everything on that because you're also responsible for yourself.
Yes, definitely.
And so at what point in your life did you have to take responsibility and say, hey, I can't be like my mom. I gotta be something different.
It was definitely when I started to date romantically.
Hmm.
So I would have a lot of friendships where these bad habits I had learned from my mom. She has borderline personality disorder, and she's always been pretty depressed most of her life, and she's an alcoholic. So she has all of these things,
Hmm.
and then being raised by her was confusing because, I've never been diagnosed with borderline or anything like that. So I was kind of this atypical kid looking at this woman having all of these, weird behaviors and weird habits. And I kind of just thought to myself, that must be normal. That's just how, things happen and
Right.
stuff like that. But when I started to date romantically, I would see kind of patterns that I had learned from her behavior, like testing relationships, she,
Ah,
she would,
yeah.
yeah, she would always like test her relationships to make sure that the person would always fight to be with her, and she had always roped them into this codependent relationship. But she needed that validation every time she instigated a fight that, like, oh, I came out right, it was my feelings, my way happened, and all of these things. And I hate to say it, but I had started to see those qualities to a lesser extent exhibited in my own relationship. And it very much caused lots of struggles and lots of fights to the point where I kind of had to realize, like, I always thought I was the issue, but I kind of had to be like, I can't just accept that I'm the issue. I have to fix it now.
Right, right. Which is it's something a lot of people do, and it's not right, but you want to feel validated. But a lot of people can cause a fight just for the very intention of feeling validated, meaning I'm causing this fight because I want to see how much that you will fight for me.
Exactly.
And it's a wrong way of going about things, and I think it just is a testament on how well we care about ourselves. And you mentioned this to me, but if you could reiterate, what is a healthy relationship to you when you had to go back and not only accept that you were the problem, but also try to fix it as well? How do you correlate those two in a relationship? Like, what does that look like for you?
Right now, at least, it's looking like I have to communicate. It's really important for me to stop saying, fine, nothing's wrong. I'm okay.
Right.
It
Right.
like it doesn't even matter. I can't use these things as defenses to hide what I'm really feeling so that he'll dig deeper and validate that, like he'll fight for me to talk. I
Exactly.
can't do that anymore. And so instead, if I catch myself even forming the worst, I'm fine or nothing's wrong, I stop myself. I take a second. I think about, well, what actually is wrong? Am I angry that he didn't say goodbye? Am I angry that this, and this little reasons? And then it forces me to say, like, okay, well, I am actually a little bit upset you ate my leftovers type of deal. Um,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
stuff like
Simple as that.
that. Mhm.
And also sometimes too, a while ago, I can't remember exactly what. Actually, I do. I was upset with my friend, and it was strange that I was upset, but I really was. My A buddy of mine had this crazy relationship with his mom. Spoke to his mom every single day.
Hmm.
Spoke to his mom every second, and he would it got to the point where almost his relationship with his mom got in the way of his relationships with other people,
Mhm.
specifically women.
Mm.
And so, I'm on the phone with my uncle one day, and I tell him about the situation. I'm like, man, it just really irks me. Me and him got in an argument about it. And my uncle straight up asked me, he's like, maybe you should ask yourself why his situation bothers you so much.
Mhm.
And I was like, wow, I don't know. I really had to ask myself that, because in hindsight, who gives a fuck? Well, but I think it really bothered me because, and I didn't understand this, is I have a really rough relationship and a bad relationship with my mother.
Mm.
And I think seeing someone else having a really great relationship subliminally hurt me,
Yeah.
and it irritated me. And it's strange because, you know, it's almost like I wanted him not to have a good relationship with his mother because I didn't.
Mm.
And some of those things you really have to ask yourself, like, why? Why does this situation bother me? Understanding that it bothers you is one thing, but asking yourself why is important as well in growth, I believe. If you haven't heard about Anchor by Spotify, it's the easiest way to make a podcast with everything you need in one place. Let me explain. Anchor has the tools to allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. When hosting on Anchor, you can distribute your podcast on listening platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. It's everything you need in one place. And best of all, Anchor is totally free. Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. And, I touched a little bit about my relationship with my mother, and, how it's been 8 years since I've spoken to her or my siblings. And you can kind of understand patterns in the life, like with my mother, not going into so much detail, but My mother got mad at my biological father, and then she banned him from seeing me. And then my mother got mad at my dad. They got a divorce, and she banned him from seeing my siblings. She did the same to me, and to other people in her life. And it's really hard. And I've understood those patterns as to be she has a struggle with mental health. Looking at your situation with your mom, I know you guys don't speak, but would you say that it has a mental health issue? And would you also say maybe that had an influence on anyone else in your life?
Yes, I mean, because of her, because of her mental health, some of it, was inherited, but a lot of it was learned behaviors, and it actually spread to like all of her children.
Right.
And subsequently, just based off the, environment we lived in, none of us talked to her, and we each went on these different paths that have nothing to do with each other, essentially.
Right.
Mm. And
No, go ahead.
oh, and just, one sister turned to, lots of drug use. And, my older sister has bipolar disorder and she has borderline schizophrenia. And she struggles so much because of that. My younger sister, she grew up kind of with a binge eating disorder, and she has like a myriad of like anxiety and depression, but most prominently PTSD because of how we grew up. And she was kind of the one that was most targeted in the abuse of it all. And then
Right.
and then for me, I've always struggled with anxiety and depression and just kind of not being able to, handle stressful situations well, and then just eating disorders and all of these different things. And it's just interesting how like if you think you have, a mental illness, that doesn't mean it's the end of the world for you, but it is within your responsibility to maybe, seek out some type of counseling or therapy, or, seek out how to get medicated for it if you know that you have this mental illness. Because sometimes, if you don't get medicated and you develop these bad habits, it hurts the people you're supposed to love.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, counseling, you spoke about this, you go through counseling, and, so do I. And there's no shame in that. I think that's also a growth, aspect of your life as well. We spoke about, and you agreed that when I was in college, I was a big asshole.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I was a dick. I went through a lot, and I just kind of reflected that on everyone else in my life. And I ended up being a real dick. And so much so where it's almost my name became infamous with just bad behavior.
Mm.
And then there was a point in my life where I said, I lost so many friends, and I've always had the assumption of, fuck them, it's not me. And then when you're down to your last bit of friends, and your circle kind of just feels tighter and tighter, and you start to look at yourself and say, well, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm the one that has the problem.
Yeah.
I've been angry and an asshole for so long, maybe there's something wrong with me. And understanding that, I had to make a big change in my life. And within that change, I wanted people to see, hey, maybe, just understand me. I had like a little bit of a mental health issue. I was traumatized as a kid. But it also, I also had to take the responsibility as, I'd always get mad at people. Like, I would go to someone and say, hey, you want to hang out? And they're like, hey, you were an asshole. I'm like, hey, that was fucking 4 years ago.
Right.
Like, well, I still remember it. So it takes time to, but, I kind of put my desire on, hey, getting everyone else to understand me but really trying to understand myself. And that goes with taking counseling and, yoga classes, and really doing a deep dive into maybe spending some time alone with myself and understanding. Do you have similar experiences or?
Oh yeah. I mean, I had a lot of friendships fall apart. And, after the first one, that may fall apart, but it's just one of these habits that people form into where they say, well, that hurt me, so I'm never going to let something like that hurt me again. What? And then you start to value friendships a little bit less and less until you just reason with yourself, well, who cares about that relationship? I wasn't really even committed to it anyway. and I'm alone always. So of course it would fail. It starts to become like an expectation of any type of relationship you have.
Oh, that's interesting you say that. It's crazy. Go ahead.
Thank you. And it's just, and there's certain points where I had to come to terms and be like, I need to start, you know, valuing my relationships more with people. And then on some levels, I reached out to people who I had kind of dismissed and said, hey, I'm sorry, I was going through a lot at that time. I hope you have a great life. And they would say, like, thank you for apologizing. I hope you have a great life too. And we would leave it at that, you know. Then there were
Yeah.
some friendships where we were able to rekindle something. And more importantly, I now take active interest and fight for my friendships that I have.
Mm,
You know,
mm. That's deep.
thanks.
And I relate full heartedly too. I think a lot of the relationships I had specifically with women in my life, I think because I was hurt so much by my mom growing up, I say kind of like what you said, hey, that hurt. I don't want to feel that again. And then relationships become a little bit less important to you,
Hmm.
which is a damaging way to move forward in your life. But that's the way it was. And like I said, I won't say anything bad about my child's mother, but we sure did go through it together. And, I feel like part of the reason it ended badly is maybe I didn't validate that relationship as much. And because I was hurt previously, and that wasn't necessarily her fault.
Mm.
I think that was more of a reflection upon myself. And then, it's a really hard task to try to, and as I grow too, you start to analyze a lot of the relationships in your life and think about what's important. And some people, for my own growth, I had to temporarily take a break from, and some people I had to let go for good.
Hmm.
And I think it's about your support system around you too. I think a lot of mental health and anxiety issues can be related to your environment.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's interesting because what you learn in an environment that's harming you is adaptive. So if you're being, yelled at and you hide in your room, that's adaptive because you're trying to be safe, you know. But when you are out in the real world, if you have been able to remove yourself from the situation and you have someone giving you maybe constructive criticism or they're, upset with something you did, it's no longer adaptive to hide anymore. What's more adaptive in that situation is communication. So I think it really shows how people, you know, it's not their fault for how they, what behaviors and habits they created when they're in a stressful situation because that's what kept them safe and alive. What's wrong now is that they're putting those same habits into a situation where it doesn't, you know, apply.
Exactly. Exactly. And, a testament to that is, hey, what makes me feel safe in a relationship is distance. I don't want to get too close to you because if I get that close, I don't feel safe anymore. I'm in a vulnerable place. And that's not necessarily a healthy place to be in. I think maybe communication and expressing those fears is also very helpful. And, either they understand and you work through it or they don't. But, again, communication is a great way to move forward. You know, when talking about mental health, what do you think some of the stigmas are out there? What are the things that you think are incorrect or correct or need to be fixed or need to be left alone?
I have so many thoughts on this. Oh my goodness. I have, a lot of experience in my life and in my studies about mental illness in the prison system.
Mm,
First and foremost, I think what a lot of people hear mental illness, they don't think about anxiety or depression. They immediately go over to like, severe schizophrenia or kind of these other illnesses that are scary to see. And, you walk on the street and you see someone pacing and talking to themselves. Your base reaction is, I don't really feel like that's safe. So that person must be crazy. And that's the stigma is that mental illness is associated with being crazy, quote unquote.
right.
And, and just as a public health student, kind of just saying, we would rather instead of medically treat and maybe even hospitalize or pay attention to these people with, schizophrenia that are on the streets, because I think it's up to like 80 to 90% of the people who are homeless have a mental illness.
Right.
So instead of trying to rehabilitate them, we kind of just often send them to jail.
Mm,
And, and the whole cycle with that is that you send these people to jail. They're now medicated for whatever mental illness they have. like bipolar, schizophrenia, or any of these things, and they
Hmm.
get genuinely better, like mentally. They get out, they can't afford or don't have insurance for the medications that help their disorder, and then they got sent back to jail, and it's just this awful cycle.
Right. Mm. I mean, speaking of that, I recently came across this study about, I can't remember where it was, but it was out of country. They have a jail system where the people who are in prison, whether it be murderous to a weed charge, they send, when they're in prison, it's almost like a college dorm. It's not, I wouldn't say luxury, but it's not a 2 by 2 cell. It's a dormitory where they have a fridge, a TV, a couch,
Right.
and they're treated like people.
That sounds
And
great.
I thought it was so interesting because you can look at it one way and say, well, that's super fucked up that you're giving kindness and and a lack of a better word, special treatment to these murderers or rapists or whatever have you. But you can kind of look at it the other side, which was their side, and say, if I treat them like human beings and they're in a place where they can't go out, they can't escape, right? They can't go to McDonald's, but I treat them like human beings. I talk to them and they're in a place where they can get the help and counseling that they need. Then, they have I'd say 9 times out of 10, the people in there who are released don't have repeated crimes. So they're not repeat offenders. And I thought it was such an interesting theory because, maybe instead of, because jail is an awful place, prison's an awful place.
Mhm.
So maybe instead of putting someone in the most vulgar and nastiest places on earth,
Mhm.
maybe treat them like a person and try to talk to them and understand them and ultimately try to change them.
Mhm.
And I think, that's a very controversial thing, but I think maybe that might be a better way to go. I don't know.
So,
Yeah. So it's an interesting point of view. And I think so much of my life, I have had the desire to be understood. I'm an asshole because of this, or I was, or I only act this way because of this. I just want people to understand me. And I think a lot of people feel that way as well who have mental health issues. I just want someone to understand that I'm real, I'm validated, I do have anxiety or I do have depression. And instead of dismissing it as something that doesn't exist, maybe try to talk to me and treat me as a person instead of maybe I'm going crazy or I am crazy.
yeah, I think one of the most tragic thing about mental illness is it's this like this constant thing that really doesn't leave you. And on top of that, it makes you feel so isolated from other people.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Because we spoke a little bit about what anxiety feels like, but depression can also be a really traumatic thing because you're talking about something that doesn't leave you. Boy, when you're depressed, it can be like the biggest rock on your shoulder that is just weighing you down every day.
Oh yeah.
And it doesn't leave. Like when you're depressed, I think something worse than pain is just feeling nothing. There was a period of my life where I was so depressed, I literally got up and felt nothing. And I can't really describe that feeling other than it was so surreal as just how lonely I felt. Because it's a really lonely feeling, right? Because you don't really want to be around anyone when you're depressed or talk to anyone. You just want to be alone and isolate yourself. And I think that's what depression is, it's complete isolation.
Most definitely. And it's hard because if you are in a state of mind where you're thinking, what good would medications do? Nothing really matters. How are you
Mm,
expected to take care of yourself or to work towards making your life better if nothing really makes a difference?
exactly. I know when I had depression, that people were trying to get me on Prozac. But a lot of females don't know this. But one thing about Prozac that a lot of males know is it has a huge side effect, and the side effect is you can't get an erection. And I'm a virgin, so I didn't have to worry about that too much. But
Did you just say you're a virgin?
Well, yes, yes.
Okay, I'll make sure your baby daughter hears that.
My daughter is a miracle baby. Just popped out. But yeah, so that's a huge side effect, and it's really unmotivating. Some of the side effects of these medications are really unmotivating to,
Yeah.
because you always hear like, I don't want to take that because it makes me feel this. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Oh,
Um,
100%. I was medicated on Paxil, paroxetine for long. And my problem is that I am incredibly forgetful. But
mm,
if you're on Paxil for a pretty long time and you forget to take a pill for a day or two, the it's more the physical side effects that are just the most painful thing in the world. You
yeah.
know, like I would get up, I would feel sweaty, I would, almost
Hmm.
pass out. My teeth would feel like they're vibrating on my head and like grinding almost. Oh, it was the absolute worst, you know?
Exactly. Right. And same with Xanax. You take Xanax for anxiety, but sometimes I'm taking Xanax, I feel really slumped for the rest of the day, obviously. So, and I'm a big health guy. So I'm like, hey, if I take this, I can't go to the gym. And then
Exactly.
you're kind of stuck in between. Do I want to have a panic attack today or do I want to go to the gym today? I don't know.
Yeah, definitely.
So, it's hard, and you really have to learn what works for you. And you can try different things. Counseling is definitely something I recommend.
Hmm.
And some people try meditation, some people try gym, exercise, stretching, all of those things. You just have to find out what works for you. Some people like just journaling. I periodically I will journal. I'll journal probably like maybe once a year. I, I find it really hard to sit down and just do that, but sometimes it helps. And I think we spoke about it a little bit, but things like Euphoria,
Hmm.
like that, those shows who really show, yeah, I think it's comforting just to have a show like that kind of express what you're feeling inside, but really can't say to the world, right?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And in regards to that, I just want to say, and I told you before, that I think you are an amazing woman because you've been able to go through a lot and really stand tall and stay true to your beliefs. I know that you put God first, which is amazing. One of the things that really helps me become a better person is searching for God and finding his guidance. And I remember quite the shock when I got baptized because I always assumed you get baptized and suddenly you're a better person.
Mhm.
And little did I know, it's not a light switch, it's a journey. What's that journey been like for you and your relationship with God and striving to become a better person yourself?
It's been a rocky road, I know that my faith is always something I can rely on, but for, a good portion of my life, I was incredibly angry, you know? It never came, became to the point where I completely turned my back on the religion, but there was a time where I gave, you know, my, my personal deity like the silent treatment,
Mm-hmm.
and it was just hard. I was, I went through a type of assault my freshman year. And it was kind of the last straw at that point. I was like, of everything that could have happened and everything I've already been through, why would you throw this on top of it?
Mm,
And that really tested my faith. And I'm still working at it. I'll always be working at it. But obviously there always comes a time for me where I'm like, this is just too hard not to rely on God anymore.
right.
Like
Exactly.
I gave you a 2-3 year silent treatment. I'll open up again. I hope you'll accept me back.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, I've had a similar experience. Sometimes you'll be like, curse you, God, why the hell did this happen to me? And you want to be angry at him because, you think that he is the dominant force over your life.
Mhm.
But in reality, when you look at some of the things in your life, you're like, oh, well, maybe that wasn't God. Maybe I made that decision. Or
Right.
maybe I chose that path.
Mhm.
And when you start to look at that, you can really feel God's presence because you're like, you gave me an opportunity to go here. I'm just the one that chose to go over here instead.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's as vague and as broad as everything happens for a reason, and we may not understand what those reasons are, but it doesn't make them any less profound and meaningful in our lives. And that's something that I've been desperately trying to understand every day in my self growth and my own discovery as a human being. And, mental health, I'm a really big advocate on, because, as you said, people are sleeping on it. And it's something that people love to dismiss, but don't discuss, because I think that makes them uncomfortable, just like as sexuality may make people uncomfortable as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you are able to express yourself and be comfortable with yourself, then that's when you can are truly free. And I think that takes understanding from all people involved. Let me ask you this: moving forward, what do you feel like? How do you feel like mental health should be viewed moving forward? What would be the ultimate goal for you if you had to be the mascot of mental health? I guess I could say.
The mascot of mental health. I like that. I think, as we stated before in this video, it's an invisible type of wound, and because it's invisible, because you're not making a gory mess of the thing with how much you're hurting, it's so much more easily ignored and so much more easily hidden. An ideal society for me is where we treat, things like mental health as almost like a sickness. It's not natural to be anxious all the time. It's not natural to, be so sad you can barely move. We need to, see that, and we need to work as a society to get, to build infrastructure to maybe medicate people if they need it, to, have people talk to counselors, to have, people in positions of authority, understand the telltale signs of when someone is really suffering, and then make a genuine effort to treat it just as you would if they were, if they had a terrible medical illness that, like a gunshot wound. I like that analogy.
Would you also agree that maybe the golden rule, treat people the way you want to be treated, would be helpful too?
100%. But
you never know what that person's going through.
Right. Me personally, I struggle with my self-value. So maybe I wouldn't want to treat someone how I, would want to be treated, because I often deserve the worst for myself. But just treat someone.
Why do you think that? Why do you think you deserve the worst for yourself?
Just learned behavior of how I was raised. And a lot of people that are in these, verbally abusive relationships in their family or with their spouse or loved one, they'll be told, you don't deserve this. You're not, worthy enough to live a happy life. And it starts to, evolve in your own mind, where you start making your own conclusions, where you're like, okay, well, if I don't deserve, this, then obviously I wouldn't deserve that. And it will just escalate.
It's interesting. It wasn't too long ago where I felt that I just constantly told myself I'm a shitty person. And because I felt like that's all I deserved. And, just based on all my actions that I've reflected on, as it was almost like a light switch in my head. When I started to really discover myself and the choices I made, when the light switch turned on, it was like, whoa, you've made some horrible decisions. I felt really shitty. And I felt like feeling shitty was the only way and my birthright almost, because I felt that way every day. And, and my outlet would be comedy. I try to make people laugh and things like that. But I think, as we know from people like Robin Williams, people who express themselves in comedy also deal with a lot of bit of pain as well. And so, it was really hard for me to really discover that there was another way of living, that things will get better, but you have to work at it every day. But they will get better.
Oh yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
Well, I loved having you on this podcast, and thank you for testing things out with me, which again is the name of my podcast, just in case you didn't know. You're great. You're the only person that I know that I could spend an hour talking about the exact same thing we just spoke about, but have a completely different conversation.
I noticed that too. Yeah.
So you're amazing. Tell people where they can find you all on Insta.
You find me at underscore VEE_99.
Okay. Now tell people what bars they can find you at in Reno so they can come stalk you. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I
Um,
like to drink.
so yeah, V, thank you so much. I'll shoot you a text here pretty soon, but thank you. Thank you so much for testing things out with me.
Of course. Don't lose the video now.
I will. I pray to God. All right. Bye bye.
All right, bye.
Now, wasn't that a good episode? I really appreciated V being on that show with me. It takes a lot to kind of be that vulnerable and to speak about things that maybe you wouldn't really speak about with other people. Maybe she wouldn't really speak about it with me if we weren't, doing a podcast. She would. We're good friends. We talk about stuff. We share secrets. Us gals, we talk. But it was a really vulnerable thing for her to do, and I'm definitely appreciated. And I think we both felt good after that. I hope that this brought you maybe some comfort. It's the first episode. There's more to go. And guys, by the way, I mentioned before, we're creating a mental health app. It's going to be amazing. I have a really cool, I don't know how to describe it. It's a really good idea. And I think you guys are going to like it. If you guys want to support the podcast in any way or the app, if you just want to believe in me and know that I have something nice for you guys, in this link under this episode, you'll see a link to make a small donation. Anything helps. You could shoot me $1, and I would forever tattoo your name on my belly. So, guys, thank you so much. Once again, we vent together, we stand together. VentPack.